Welcome to Season 3 of Robbie Burns and Friends, a podcast all about music, technology, productivity, and creativity. This week's guest is Chris Russell. I am going through what's called, I didn't know this until recently, that I had the man cold.
Don't know anything about it.
You don't know anything about the man cold?
No.
One of my colleagues down the hall, a science teacher, tells me it's when a man complains about their cold a lot.
Okay.
So, I've got that apparently.
Doesn't sound like it though. Your voice sounds pretty clear.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Do you want to get this show rolling?
We sure can.
Awesome. Sounds great. I am joined today by Chris Russell. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Robbie.
You want to say anything about yourself?
No, I don't think so. I'm just me.
Awesome. I will say something about you. I will only say this, that Chris is a music educator at a one-to-one iPad school, and we are going to talk today about the Apple education event that happened this past week.
That pretty much covers it. Yeah.
That pretty much covers it. Let's do it. So, I mean, we can do this a couple ways. We can... I wrote down some notes. I kind of just wrote down sequentially what I thought the big major announcements were. There was a whole lot of stuff that happened in this event that I would not consider to be major announcements or even announcements at all. I don't know if you want to talk about that stuff too. I don't know. Do you want me to just sort of go through my outline here and then we'll just see where it takes us?
Yeah, just go through the outline. We'll see where we go.
Awesome. So Apple had an education event this past week, Tuesday. And this is the first Apple education event that has happened since 2012, where Apple made some major claims about their philosophy and their vision for e-books and for digital textbooks. And that was the event that we saw the birth of iBooks Author, and I believe iTunes U, and a whole lot of tools to make the design of textbooks very, very easy for the iBooks platform. We haven't heard much from Apple in the past 6 years. A lot has changed in education technology. Google Classroom has led the way for a lot of other student management systems. We have the Chromebook, which has really taken hold in a lot of primary and secondary education, and just a ton of development in what the kinds of standards are for how education software is expected to behave, in particular in how flexible it needs to be. And in many cases, we've seen a lot of development in web-based software, which I thought in 2012 was going to die because of the strength of things like the App Store. I thought we were going to just all do apps. But in education, browser-based software has really taken a hold. And the student and the learning management systems have really become a thing. So anyway, Apple has come back with an event where they've restated some of their vision and passion for the classroom, and they made a couple of announcements. So I guess the first major one that they talked about was this new iPad. What did you think of that? Or actually, first,
yeah, okay.
Before would you add to or edit anything I just said? Is that a good summary?
I think that's a good summary. I think we're in a very different spot as they finally, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, as they've kind of pushed iBooks Author now into Pages. I actually opened up my 3 technology books the other day and started the process of merging them into a single book and updating. And I was reading about my own writing and some things I had forgotten, where by 2015, Florida wanted to go all digital textbooks by 2015, and there was a push at the U.S. Department of Education for all textbooks to be digital by 2017. And I hadn't thought about that for a long time and realized we're past those 2 deadlines, and I don't think it happened in either situation. I think there's still a lot of textbooks out there And it's been a really interesting week watching the reactions to the iPad announcement. And right before the iPad announcement, too, I think is worth saying, Google announced its first Chromebook tablet, like an actual tablet, not just a hybrid machine that flips over, but at a price point of $329, too. So it was an interesting week for people that are critics of Apple and the iPad to also have a tablet come out from the company that they, in that case, would love. So yeah, the Chromebook has changed things a little bit. The web-based software is better than ever. I'm not sure it's still the best, but it's better than ever. And Google now controls through Chrome, now not through their own devices, but through Chrome. I think they own 60% of the market share of sales to educational technology in the United States. Now, the other interesting part is that we're not seeing that same percentage elsewhere in the world. It's purely an American phenomenon that it's happening in such a strong way with Google right now. So I guess those are the only things that I would add to that intro, I guess.
And speaking of that's all great. And speaking to this, those deadlines, so to speak, of textbooks sort of taking over, I will say, and we'll get to this a little bit later too, that it's not just that e-textbooks have entirely replaced hardware textbooks, so to speak, but like we're not even close. And a lot of that, I feel like, is due to some of Apple's own initiatives they stated back in 2012, receiving little to no follow-through since then.
You mean like iBooks author?
That, I
okay, I guess, yeah, I'd have to wait to see what you have to say about that to find that.
Sure. Okay, so yeah, those are all really good additions. So you are in a one-to-one iPad school, and you've been that way since
2013. That's one of the reasons why I went to this school. It was one-to-one iPad, and I wanted to teach in that environment.
So Apple announced at this event a brand new update to the 9.7-inch iPad, which is their entry-level device. And this new iPad, in addition to a whole lot of new tech specs, adds support for the Apple Pencil.
Yep.
I can't think of much else to say about it in terms of like the features they're adding to it. Do you feel like this is a meaningful update in the education space?
I do think it's a meaningful update. It's certainly not trying to remember the right term that I want to use. It's just an upgrade, though. It's not a complete hierarchy of a new thing. So the previous iPad that existed was pretty decent. They came out about a year ago. Apple came out with the first 9.7-inch iPad really for education, although it's been sold a lot of other ways too, without the Retina screen. And that price point was exactly the same, $329 for the device, $299 for education, $309 if you're just a student looking to buy one for yourself. But that's a price point that falls even cheaper than the iPad mini. If you look out right now, you can buy the iPad mini, I think, for $349, or you can buy the new iPad just off the shelf for $329, and you get, I think it's like a machine that's twice as fast. The shift to including the Apple Pencil is really nice, but I see that more as a benefit for teachers than I do students necessarily, and that's something we can talk about, because I'm not sure how many parents will actually go out and buy their students a $99 pencil, and I don't see schools buying those for students. I guess they're $89, and then of course Logitech is going to be making a $59 or $49 lesson version of the pencil for education with Apple's good graces, but I don't see that as a shift. However, you can see for students that have it, if every time I sit down and I work on my iPad and I'm pulling out my Apple Pencil, I can't imagine going to college without my iPad Pro. If I could go back 20 years and take my iPad Pro with me, I just think of how much better my life would be in so many ways. Taking notes, composing on the fly, all the stuff that I did as a student in college. I can't imagine what life would have been like if I would have had that tool. And I can't imagine that people want to sit there in seminars and just sit there and type on a keyboard. I don't get it. But then maybe they're taking different types of notes than I used to. I don't know, Robbie. What do you think of that? Because I know you've had an iPad Pro longer than I have.
I am inclined to agree with you. The pencil update looks great. In fact, this new iPad is interesting to me from a consumer perspective because I think someone that is looking to buy an iPad, maybe even a teacher who's at a school where no students are using an iPad, this is a device now that if you're looking to do something like work with an app like Fourscore, where you can annotate scores with the Apple Pencil, or where you can annotate PDF documents with the Apple Pencil, this is now a really reasonable price to enter into that and still get what I feel like is the most compelling feature of the iPad Pro. I use the smart keyboard cover for my iPad Pro, but I could live without it sooner than I could without the pencil.
Yep, I agree.
So it's interesting, and I really don't love the giant 12.9-inch iPad for things like e-reading. Like if I ever were to buy another iPad, I've seriously considered going a little smaller next time around. And I don't know, this newer, cheaper iPad does not seem, other than its entry-level 32 gigabytes of storage, seems like a really good option for someone who wants that size. So I think it's interesting in that regard. I don't know what school is going to buy, after buying however many $250 iPads they need for their classrooms, I cannot see what school is going to then shell out another $89 an iPad for an Apple Pencil.
I totally agree, but do remember that when we went into the iPad years ago, I mean, even in 2013 when our school went iPad, that was a $499 investment per device, plus your armored case, which typically I think were $60 or more, and you were already... What's that?
Sorry to cut you off. For a classroom set, do you feel like the protective case, is a must?
I do, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I'm looking. Since the last time we did one of these, I'm recording in Ferrite, and now I'm using that wonderful split screen ability that came with us. Was that iOS 10 or iOS 11? Or iOS 10? Was that split screen?
9, actually.
Was it 9? Holy cow. Anyway, so I'm running split screen Ferrite Studio, looking at Apple's own education page as we talk, and they've got a wonderful promo picture with all these kids with iPads out of cases. And I'm just thinking, oh man, shatteredness all over the place. Because I watch students throw their iPads in their case in the air and catch them on a regular basis. This isn't something that randomly happens. When you're in a one-to-one school, the respect and kind of recognition of the wonderful ability to have these devices gets worn out really quickly. And kids lose that kind of respect of property so quickly in terms of treating the devices like they're worth something. I mean, look at their cell phones. Sometimes it's a badge of honor to have a screen that's smashed 8 million ways. So I would say a case is crucial, and that's where Logitech's new case for $100 is interesting. And yeah, that does add to the cost. But then suddenly you have a device with a keyboard, and that's the other side, is that there's so many teachers still that insist on a keyboard, and I don't get it. When the rest of the world is moving towards voice recognition in every possible way, education is so staunch on saying we've got to have a keyboard. And the funny thing is, as music teachers, that doesn't help us that much because we don't have a musical keyboard typically that we can use. So I guess maybe we're ahead of the curve there. But man, we were talking on Twitter about this, and the number of people that say, well, the Chromebook is better because of price and because of the keyboard. It's like, well, how are you integrating that device in your classroom? And the answer is, well, they're writing papers and they're making PowerPoint presentations or they're making Google Slide presentations on the free software that Google provides. And it's like, that's not changing education at all. That's just substituting written paper for type paper, or instead of drawing something, making a presentation. We've got to go further. One-to-one schools need to go further. And Chromebook schools need to find a better way of using technology other than just writing papers. I don't know. That part is really frustrating me as I watch comments this week, because education shouldn't be just about writing papers.
So I want to talk more about Chromebook keyboards and Chromebook price. But first, this Logitech... Actually, hold on. Before even the Logitech Stylus, you think that the pencil is something that would get traction in the hands of students?
I think it would, especially if schools can find a way to get them to students to buy individually, if that makes sense. Because right now it sounds like It may not even be sold in Apple stores separately.
Yeah, it does seem... Actually, so speaking of a stylus being in the students' hands and Logitech announced, as you were mentioning earlier, an Apple-sanctioned device called the Logitech Crayon, which is basically an Apple Pencil, but in a form factor where it's got, it's like really blocky shaped and looks to be kind of rubbery and student friendly. This device, from the reading I've done, it looks like it has all of the features of the Apple Pencil except for pressure sensitivity. And I thought to myself, when I'm not drawing, I don't really need that feature. So maybe I want one of these devices. And so I went to Logitech's website, and there's no way you can even buy that device without calling Apple Education Sales.
And truthfully, I have bought styluses myself in the past that were less feature rich, and I paid more, if that makes sense.
Well, to even have the doubled screen refresh rate, and when I say sensitivity, I don't mean like pressure sensitivity, but just the sensitivity that the Apple Pencil itself is designed with.
Yep.
That's at half the price, which the Logitech Crayon is $49. That's a really big deal.
I think so. If you're going to buy a stylus anyway, you're going to be paying it probably at least $16, right? At least. And then to go to like Adonit's powered, styluses, that you're almost into the $50 range right away. So to have a device that actually works with the iPad, and by the way, doesn't even have to be sunk to the iPad. I don't know how they're going to connect them necessarily, but it's a different type of pairing than the Apple Pencil too, because you don't plug it into the iPad. That's the one negative, is that you can't charge it in your iPad to get a quick charge like we can.
Yeah, plenty of people have written and spoken about this at length. I'll link a blog post to the show notes of this show about, it's like an all you need to know about the Logitech Crayon post. And then on a recent episode of Canvas, which is a podcast about iPad productivity, hosted by Fraser Spears and Federico Vitici, they talk in depth about how it pairs as well, and give some more tech specs about it. So I'll link those both in. Okay, so this was a subject of real debate that I saw following the event. The argument that Chromebooks are better for education, or are doing better in education because of either the fact that they have a keyboard attached or because they're cheaper. And I know that you have some strong feelings about this. Care to share?
Well, I think it's true. It's absolutely true. And we the other phrase I would add too is that Google throws in, the productivity suite for free to schools. I mean, now granted, if you have an iPad, you have access to that too, but they don't run the same. If you have an iPad, your iPad version of the Google Suite does not work the same, even in Chrome, than it does on a MacBook, or as it does on a Windows device, or as it does on a Chromebook. So, and I think that's secretly intentional on the side of Google, or not so secretly intentional, because if they would make that Google Suite as functional on the iPad, it would cut into those sales, because then you'd no longer have the divide. But Google Slides doesn't work the same. Google Sheets doesn't work the same. Google Docs doesn't work the same. So, but there are so many English teachers. In fact, even in my own school, last year, we looked at the idea, or 2 years ago now, we looked at the idea of device refresh. And our English teachers actually brought forward the idea of leaving iPads to go to Chromebooks because of keyboards. And so even in a one-to-one environment, that temptation is strong. We're so connected to the keyboard. And it just makes me think back to, I don't know if you remember Star Trek 4. Now this is getting dated now, where Scotty was going to design. They had to go back in time to save the whales or whatever. But Scotty was at a metallurgy place, and he was going to give the curator the secret formula to transparent aluminum in exchange for I don't know, the things to build the fish tank that needed in the Enterprise, whatever. But then Scotty goes to the computer, and it's a mouse, and he starts talking to the mouse, and the guy's like, "Oh, that's not how you do it," and he hands him a keyboard. He says, "Oh, a keyboard, how quaint," and he cracks his knuckles, and he starts typing like crazy on a keyboard. And I just, again, we should be looking for ways to move away from keyboards as the primary input source to something else if the rest of the culture is going that way. If you look at Alexa and you look at other things, it seems to be awkward to have education so strongly bound to device that everybody else is leaving behind. So I feel strongly about that. And then the price point, we've got to remember that schools don't buy the best Chromebook for all subjects. If you want the best Chromebook for all subjects, you buy a flip Chromebook that has a touch interface that your Chromebook can be a tablet for classes like art and music that get beyond the keyboard. But schools don't buy that Chromebook. They buy the $179 bargain special. They pay the $30 Chromebook edition. If they're smart, they get some kind of case on it. And then suddenly your price point of that Chromebook is not that far off from an iPad. Now, the other side is iPads also require an MDM, a mass device manager or multi-device manager, and those systems cost thousands of dollars per year, and that's the one spot where I think Apple really missed in this particular cycle. They should have included that. And I know that the big company is Jamf, Jamf, that does that software, but if Apple really wants to get into education, they should provide everything that the school needs so that people will buy the hardware. And that's the one spot that they're missing. But if they do that, they're going to take out a couple companies that make their living on Apple products. But that's kind of where we're at. So yeah, that strongly opinion on that whole idea of price and keyboards, I got to admit.
Okay, so that's a great segue into a couple of parts of the keynote. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but I feel like that's a good segue into a part of the keynote that featured very heavily software. Some new software, some updates to old software, but nonetheless, software for managing students and for managing learning, SMS or LMS. So Apple announced an app called, they announced the Classroom app for the Mac now. It's an app that existed on iOS. And do you use this app? You have to.
We do. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so for those who are not at one-to-one schools or who do not have iPads, can you talk in very brief terms what the Classroom app does?
Absolutely. First, I'll just say it is not Google Classroom. It is not a way for students to submit work and for you to send out assignments and to grade stuff. Apple Classroom is a way for a teacher from a curated class set. Now, also people can join your class, but generally the power is your district preloads your classes. So when you open up that class, you can see every iPad that's in your class. And basically you have the functionality then to watch what your students are doing, make sure they're on the right task, or you have some controlling features such as being able to bring them into a specific app or lock them into a specific app. Now, the negative side, and this is still true, is that it's Bluetooth enabled and Wi-Fi. So the student has to be on Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and you can turn those off, but if a student goes into airplane mode, they can defeat that. So, and it's not a surprise, every student knows it. But then, if they are discoverable by you, you can actually see what they're doing, and you can actually see their screens. You can see an entire class at one time or an individual, and it just helps you keep on top of that because it's basically like what teachers do at staff meetings. If you're not watching what your teachers are doing on staff meetings, they are checking email, playing the latest version of whatever game is out there, whatever. Students will do the same thing as well in a classroom. So that's what Classroom is right now.
So what kind of identification management features does Classroom lack that you were mentioning that Jamf offers and that you feel like should be in the equation for Apple to really take hold?
Well, Jamf, the thing that Jamf offers is the entire package from registering iPads to when you sync them all up and pushing them all out, and it's just it's the difference. Apple does offer. Now I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Do you happen to remember what the configurator? There we go. Apple does offer configurator, which works on a small scale, but when you're pushing out, like for example, our school has well over 700 iPads, and in the district, I think there have to be close to 5,000, 6,000 iPads in our district, with 5 one-to-one schools out of our 17 or 18 schools in our school district. And the Jamf products just allow the mass management of those devices at a scale that Apple you can't with configurator. It would just take too long. So a lot of it becomes wireless, and they're hand in hand with Apple. And in fact, Jamf just announced 0-day functionality where they're working so closely with Apple right now that they can guarantee that when, for example, iOS 12 comes out, Jamf will work with that on day 0, versus in the past it's always been, let's not upgrade to iOS 12 because we're not sure if Jamf will work with it or if other things will break. So it's a crucial piece of software for a large deployment of iPads.
Okay, so that doesn't mean 0 days to take the iPads out of the box and get all your student accounts up and running.
Nope, somebody still has to take them out of the box, boot it up, but Jamf and Apple together have worked in a way that they can actually just simply enter or scan the barcode on the iPads as they take them out of the box, and they get locked into your system. So basically, somebody could steal that iPad, and when they went to wipe out the iPad, when it popped back up, it can only be deployed at that school. So there's no way to get around that. You can't wipe out that part of the memory. It's almost like Find My iPhone, but in a much more durable way that your iPad gets locked. And together with Apple and Jamf, that works together that way.
Why doesn't Apple just buy them?
That's my question. It's not like they have some money or anything.
Okay, so why... Well, let me ask this. Does the Classroom app for Mac, and maybe I'm thinking like an old person when I say this, but does a Classroom app for the Mac with keyboard shortcuts and batch editing, does that make this process any easier, or is this just a way for teachers who are stuck to the Mac to finally have access to the application?
No, some schools, I'll give you an example. Now, it's been a couple of years, but I know of a major school district out here in Minnesota that gets applauded for its technology integration. A few years ago, they decided to roll out iPads to 9th graders only, and then didn't even give their teachers iPads at the same time. So their teachers still had Macs, but then you have a situation like, now Classroom's only been out a couple of years, and it's getting better, but if you are not given an iPad as a teacher, how are you going to control your classroom set of iPads, or the student iPads in your classroom? And the answer is you couldn't. But now with Classroom for the Mac, what it's going to do is just help you with classroom management. It's not going to help you with deployment. It's not going to help you with anything else. It's just going to help you, again, make sure that your students are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Because, again, accountability is a huge issue.
Okay. I have some feelings on why Classroom app for the Mac took so long, but we'll come to those later. I think they'll fit better with a later point I want to make.
Go for it.
So then Apple announced a new app called Schoolwork, and my understanding is that this app is a little bit more analogous to Google Classroom. Schoolwork, no, okay. Well, you know what? You take this because you probably, having more experience with this, could better explain what the Schoolwork app claims to do.
Yeah, claim and seeing it in person are two different things, but really it's connected closely to their ClassKit, which is a new thing that they also announced, and they have to be mentioned in the same breath. Because now what's going to happen is educational apps are going to be able to tap into ClassKit, which is a whole other standard of pre-existing code that developers can tap into to make things easier, so that then when you're using any app that's a part of ClassKit, the results from those apps will show in a central place called Schoolwork. So it's going to be a way that educators can push out some work and then collect work back, but it's also going to be a spot where the different educational apps can finally have a common footing where a teacher can see a number of things at once. And that's been one of the big problems is, for example, I like Shobie. I like Shobie a lot. Shobie is an app that's basically a very light management system, but I mainly use it for sheet music because I can distribute sheet music and I can collect it back and it never goes outside of the system, and students can turn pages left to right and they can annotate in their music. It has no other features, and it costs me about $140 a year to have it for all of my students, all 340 of my students to use. Well, if Shobie is smart, or even potentially Schoology is smart, what they can do is they can type or kind of connect into ClassKit, and then student work would show for the teacher not only if they've done it, but the percentage that they've got it complete and some other things. And it's really got a lot of potential for schools, because that's, if every teacher is doing something different, or a teacher's got students in 5 different apps, which is very common. You know, they used to call that, what was that, app smashing, where you'd take, 3 or 4 different apps to do something. And I always thought that was a funny thing, because that's how it works. If I'm making a play-along video, I'm using 5 or 6 different apps to make that happen. That's not something special. That's just life on the iPad, right? Also life on anything else. You just use different apps. But that Schoolwork is going to give the opportunity to do more than that, which I think really in the long run gives Apple an edge over Google Classroom, except for the fact of all the schools that are just committed to Google Classroom, and that's all that we're, in Google Suite, and that's all that we need for our students, which again makes any music educator go a little crazy, because we know that we need more than the Google Suite. But so I don't know, Robbie, if that answers that thought or not.
Let me go over some of that again real quick. Okay,
yeah,
so
go for
real
it.
quick. So Shobie, my understanding, Shobie is like a music notation editor, but that has some light learning management features.
Nope, not even a music. It's just a basically. It's a classroom management deal. So it's not music education specific at all.
Oh, okay. Okay, so
Yep.
I was mistaken on that.
I use it as sheet music, as a sheet music reader, but that's a very twisted way of using it, but it works well.
So wait, hold on. So your school does not have a district mandated learning management system that it has you use, or are you using Shobie in addition to another learning management system?
The answer is yes. For both. Our school went Schoology. Our school went Schoology, as did a couple others. And next year, an entire district is going to be using Schoology. But even though Schoology is not a good place to read music from, side note, but Schoology is awesome. There's a lot of benefits to Schoology. I'm not talking badly about it. But our district will let teachers use other apps as well that solve the problem. Just the way that... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so these are both more analogous to Google Classroom or to Canvas.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, Canvas has
Okay.
some nice features as well, yeah.
All right, so yeah, my school district uses Canvas. So, all right, and to use, it sounds like to use Shobie in the way that you are would be kind of like if someone like myself were to use Musicfirst in combination with Canvas. In other words, Musicfirst is a learning management system that has tools specific to music educators, and it also deep links into third-party browser-based software like Soundtrap, which is a digital audio workstation that lives in a Google Chrome tab, and Noteflight, which is another, it's a notation editor that lives in the tab of a web browser. It seems like that's kind of the way you're using it, as in the same way that I would use Musicfirst, where Musicfirst would be sort of a front end to my students, where I assign all of the musical tasks to them that route them into various other music-based software, but then I would have those grades feed back into my Canvas gradebook.
Right. Yep.
Now, Musicfirst seems a little bit more analogous to Schoolwork now that I think about it, because Musicfirst routes students out to these third-party music apps where they can complete their work, and then when they're finished, it automatically saves it back to the gradebook that's in Musicfirst, so that when the teacher sees it, they can check their students' progress in each of those various projects. But ultimately, if your school district uses something that they have designated to the whole school staff, you can take those final grades and feed them back into your master gradebook, so you're not doing all sorts of extra work.
Yep, that's exactly it. The difference is schoolwork will be free, whereas Musicfirst, is a subscription based. But I'm not saying that's a negative either. That's the reality of the marketplace.
So since someone like Soundtrap has a relationship with Musicfirst, where Musicfirst can sort of deep link, like have a student, here, complete this project in Soundtrap, and then the student clicks start, and it opens them in a Soundtrap file, which maybe you've already pre-populated it with a drum loop, and they have to add a bass loop and a piano loop to it or something. It seems like what Schoolwork could do is it could allow Soundtrap, and I don't know, does Soundtrap have a functioning iPad app?
They do.
Okay. So it seems like what they might be able to do is integrate with the free Apple Schoolwork app in the same way that they integrate with Musicfirst, where using the Schoolwork app, a teacher could say, okay, I'm assigning you this task, which is going to happen in Soundtrap, but this next assignment is going to happen in Pages, and this next assignment is going to happen in GarageBand.
Yep, that's correct.
So what I think is interesting, and this is getting a little bit meta, Shobie, Schoology, Canvas are all these learning management systems. I'm curious to see what you were saying a second ago is, will they all take advantage of ClassKit, thus enabling me to, for free, take advantage of features of the Schoolwork app without actually cutting my ties with my school district mandated Canvas?
That's going to have to be something that Apple sells, if that makes sense. Apple's going to have to use a little bit of influence to make that happen, but the answer is theoretically yes. Because Apple should want to become the hub. They should want to become the hub. I mean, that's really the catch. The same way that Google Classroom, let's be honest, Google wants to be the hub. Google wants to be where you go for all of your computing needs. And there's nothing to be ashamed of there. That's just what they want. So Apple should feel the same way. They should feel like we're providing these wonderful pieces of equipment, and we're going to give you everything that you need to make your life easier. So I'm not sure where that ends, and maybe then Schoolwork can find its way exporting back into like a gradebook in Canvas or a gradebook in Schoology or something like that. I don't know.
I would think that someone like Canvas would have to. I mean, Apple could certainly push them to, but I think Canvas would have to implement it into their software themselves. But it would be an interesting. To see the Schoolwork app sort of acting as an intermediary to connect some of the powerful apps of iOS to some of these classroom management systems. It's like, okay, Canvas says, all right, well, okay, so the teacher can designate a student to do a project in GarageBand through Schoolwork, but then ultimately Canvas uses the ClassKit API to then grab those Schoolwork grades and import them into the gradebook. Is what I think would be cool anyway. I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, it might happen. I mean, the issue is the flood of information, right? I mean, and I haven't looked at Canvas's grading process. It's been a couple of years since I've actually played with Canvas. And our district obviously went Schoology, which the way I friendly describe it is kind of like the Facebook of learning management systems. But I've looked at the gradebook in there, and you're just flooded. You're flooded with information, and whoever can figure out how to simplify that data to make it more effective for teachers, to find ways to help keep students accountable to the work that they're supposed to be doing and to certain levels of achievement, whoever gets that is going to make a lot of money in this educational field. Google Classroom is... I've seen it used. We've used it a little bit, but now we're even moving towards ditching that in our district for Schoology, because it sounds like, well, I know our district is going all the way Schoology, and that's the 6th or 7th largest district in Minnesota with, I don't know how many students, again, 17 to whatever number of schools that we've got in our district. So, I don't know. It's whoever figures out how to make the data easier to figure out is going to win this in the long run.
I hope you're right. I think that whoever continues to be the cheapest is going to win this in the long run. Well, maybe not in the long run.
Yeah, not a long... And it's true. And then, there was that quote about price. Somebody said the other day, Apple has never competed on the issue of price. So to expect Apple to try to compete with Chromebooks is ridiculous, because they're never going to compete at the bottom of the barrel to try to beat Google. That's not their intent. Unfortunately, school districts, and that's the other thing, is that I wish IT people would be honest and be honest and just say, we don't like Apple products. If somebody can come out and just say that and say, we don't like Apple, fine, but don't give us like bogus responses of why. At the same time, don't pick on Chromebooks and just say that they're cheap and they're not functional, when realistically, well, they might be cheaper than an iPad, but if you're using them right, there are some very creative things that you can do, but you're going to have to work at doing it. But it's both sides right now are just it's like we're back in the Windows Mac argument, 15 years ago. It's like we've just traveled back in time, and instead of being Windows and Apple, now we're Google and Apple. And then Google, I mean, quite honestly, the one device that Google makes, no school is buying. So it's not even a Google product. You're buying an Acer or an Asus, or I think Dell has some Chromebooks. Who else has Chromebooks? I don't even know. Samsung?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't follow that area enough.
It just, anyway.
So, I totally agree with you. So, speaking a moment ago of whoever can aggregate the data, or at least make the workflow between lots of different apps the smoothest and the simplest, why didn't Apple... Why are all the features of the Schoolwork app, why didn't Apple just roll those into the Classroom app? And I guess this brings up another that brings up another question of mine too, which is, I know that iTunes University is still a thing. I don't know if that's something that you're using or if that's more higher education, but I'm just wondering why these... And I think we'll get to this later. I think Apple is having a little bit of a software problem now, and there's a little bit of fragmentation in their hardware and software line that's not always very clear or concise. It seems to me like they would want to be making one coherent platform for all of this stuff.
Possibly. I think that I'm not even sure if iTunes U is sticking around. Something in my brain seems to think that was announced that it was going to stop.
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I don't know anybody that's actually actively using iTunes U anymore. They really put their money down on iTunes U about the same time that Google announced Classroom. And I think they just missed the bus. What Apple was trying to do is to provide content and source a way for people to provide content. And what schools were looking for was management. Looking for, in particular, classroom content management, ways to collect and grade homework, where Apple was looking at providing the actual lessons and the work. And there was a divide there. And then Apple's answer was, to provide like iBooks and courses with rich textbooks that had movies and other things. And I think I think Apple's vision was right, but the their practical level wasn't right. They don't work in the classroom, so therefore they didn't realize what teachers really were looking for was a way to assign and collect work. I think that's really where it's at. Now, I think it's smart to keep Classroom separate from Schoolwork, because Classroom has a different purpose. Classroom is actual student management on their devices versus Schoolwork, which is management of student assets, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And now that you say that, it is a little bit more clear to me why they did that. And iTunes U, to my understanding, and I could be wrong, so someone can feel free to fact check me. I thought that iTunes University, although it was sort of a curriculum where you could watch lecture videos and experience different modules of learning through interactive video. My understanding was that it could link students to assignments that a teacher designated that were like in iBooks and Pages and stuff. I might be wrong on that, and I should probably stop talking about iTunes University before I say wrong things. But if that is true, I would wonder if those features are just going to eventually get rolled into Schoolwork, or if Schoolwork is eventually going to have the ability to add things like modules into it.
I would say it's probably. I just pulled up iTunes U on my iPad Pro and just looking, and it looks like they've got homework handed, integrated gradebook, and private discussions. It's a seamless way to organize your classroom. I don't know that stuff that's been added in the last couple of years, but I don't know anybody that uses it.
That they're going to have to roll that into Schoolwork. I mean, and this is too sort of speaking from a consumer angle. I mean, the writing is on the wall. iTunes is not long for this world. I mean, the podcasts has been renamed Apple Podcasts. Even iBooks is being renamed to Books. This whole idea of this silo called iTunes that oversees all of your media and the management of your iOS devices, this is going to eventually die, and we're going to, I hope, see numerous apps on the Mac, much like we do on iOS, like a podcasts app, a books. Well, we already have a books app. Instead of watching all of our movies and TV shows on iTunes, they'll just make a TV app like they do on iOS now. I think we're eventually going to see iTunes U follow that same course.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. But, I don't think we're wrong. I don't think iTunes U has been that popular. Maybe Fraser Spears uses it, but I don't know if anybody else does.
I'm pretty sure that's who I heard it from, was listening to his podcast, the Canvas podcast. All right. Well, this next update is really fun on a consumer level as well, because it is a feature that is available to all users of iWork. The entire iWork suite got an update. Now you can use your Apple Pencil to draw inline and to annotate by drawing with the pencil right on top of the document in a feature they're calling Smart Annotations, which is currently in beta. But the catch here is that, and this is maybe why we've waited so long for the feature. I know Microsoft Office came out with this feature the day the Apple Pencil was released, which is super frustrating. But Apple's take on it is that when you do something like when you circle a word or underline some text and then you type in the document in another place, all of the drawn annotations will link to the text. So if I circle a word and then add a paragraph above the paragraph where that word was, the circle will stay attached to the word and move downward with it as I continue to type above it. Have you tested this feature out yet?
I have not quite yet. I've been working with a couple of the other things just loosely, but what I'm most excited about here goes into Keynote, because Keynote is also the same annotation powered deal. And I'm not sure how much that really truly adds to the Pages experience, because Pages is a word processor, realistically. Although now it's got iBooks embedded in it, so that might change things too. But in terms of Keynote, I'm a big Keynote fan. I've been through the Smart training. I've been trained on Smart Notebook. I've used PowerPoint for years. I'm working with Google Sheets when I have, or Google Slides when I have to. But my favorite app to make presentations, even on a daily basis for my choirs, is 100% Keynote. And I've always said to people that Keynote is sort of like using it, even on the iPad. It's kind of like Smart Notebook and PowerPoint had a baby and that's what you had. Well, suddenly, when you can actually annotate in Keynote, and it's not just a temporary, like highlighting or circling, which has been in Keynote for a while, or, laser pointer, when you can actually annotate in there, suddenly Keynote takes on an entire different meaning in education, and it really changes. So of all the announcements, the 9.7 iPad is awesome. We know we have to buy another 250 iPads for our students next year because we're opening a new school. It's just being moved. We're building, it's the new version of our current school. but we're going to gain about 250 students. We're going to buy the $299 iPad for those kids, and they're going to have some of that cool, technology that even the existing iPads don't have. That's all good, but when you put in handwriting in Keynote, suddenly Keynote becomes more than just a presentation software. It becomes an educational tool. Math teachers are going to love it. Music teachers that teach music theory are going to love it, and it's going to be massive. And that's where I think, quite honestly, it's the biggest deal for in the presentation, and Apple just kind of skipped over it. But it makes Keynote into a smartboard alternative.
All right, let's get back to that in a second. I just wanted to point out
Okay.
two use cases for pages and numbers that immediately jumped out to me when I saw this feature. I'm surprised to hear you don't see any use for it in Pages. I would edit my work, and like if I were writing something or even just drafting something as short as an email, I can see myself editing it with a tool as flexible as an Apple Pencil much sooner than using any of the features. The editing features where you can like comment on a block of text or highlight a word or something and underline stuff. I've always found all of those keyboard-based tools to be kind of clunky, but I would much rather just draw on top of my document, which is a super cool use case. And in numbers, I very often make bus lists for field trips. I just like doing them in a table view. So I make them in numbers really often. And I can already see myself, rather than like exporting to PDF and opening it in PDF Expert and managing that whole thing, I can just see myself now going to numbers on iPad, launching my bus list, and then just scribbling right on it and doing attendance straight from the bus. So anyway, those are two real quick ideas I thought of.
Yeah, but I would never think of either of those, to be honest with you, because, again, when I do editing, I don't mess with those extra tools either. I just read and edit. I don't typically even write anything. I just edit. And then bus lists, I have used, I used to, and I haven't had to do it for a while. But I don't know if you've ever used Attendance too. I don't know if you've ever used that app. But when I would take trips with students, I would print them all out a QR code that they would either keep the QR code or take a picture with their phone. And as they got on the bus, they would just walk past me and scan in. And I didn't even have to worry about who was there and wasn't there because you could actually see. That was a really easy solution that worked really well.
Yeah, I dig that. Is that Attendance 2 with the number 2 or with the word spelled out 2?
Attendance with the number 2, and it's not a very pretty app, but it's one of the most functional apps I ever used, and it's now going back a few years. I would definitely do it again, without a question. I even used to do classroom attendance with it. I would print out a QR code on every folder, and then students would walk up to the iPad and scan in for the start of class. Worked
cool.
great. Worked great.
That's awesome.
I knew one teacher of a really large middle school choir that he had two iPads. One was for boys and one was for girls, and they just scanned into the boy iPad or the girl iPad. Pretty cool. But anyway, so I don't know. I have different case use, but I don't see myself writing in Pages. Maybe I just haven't done it or numbers very often. But man, I can see it in Keynote.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Do you have students come up to the front of the room when you're projecting Keynote onto the projector? Do you have them write on your iPad?
Not too much. If I had a smartboard, I would.
Okay. So you said you're using Keynote. It sounds like you're using Keynote kind of like a smartboard, though, not in terms of student interaction, but that you are able to take a presentation that you and for me, Keynote is great, but I use it to write all of my presentations that I give at music conferences and things, and I use it in all of my classes. But in the band classroom, I find that it's usually just like a static slide with the agenda and some other notes, or occasionally I'll embed some multimedia stuff that'll play back automatically. But I'm thinking now, I'm trying to think about the general music class I teach and how I might use something like the Apple Pencil annotation. What kinds of things do you foresee yourself doing with the Apple Pencil? Can you give a couple of specific ones?
Well, if you are mirroring, and that's the big catch, because as of late, I've actually been using my MacBook with static slides more than anything else, even with like videos embedded that I play or whatever. Stealing from Katie Wardrobe the idea of doing a startup video at the beginning of your class to get them into the door and and on time. I've been doing that lately. But I can totally see mirroring, everything from writing out something to, again, teaching theory concepts and having just a slide that you could go to at any point with a staff on it that you could just start writing on it. The possibilities are endless. So anything that you could use a smartboard for, you could use your iPad for, and better yet, you wouldn't need to necessarily have the student come up to you to use it. You could bring the iPad to the student. Instead of them coming up to the board, you could go to them. So, I don't know. Also, you have the idea where you could actually mirror different student iPads in the room as well, up to the front as well.
Now, wait, hold on. What are you mirroring to if you're walking around the classroom with your iPad and not connected directly into a projector?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that you'd have to be. So, like right now, I'm not. But, like, for example, next year at our new school, they decided to go with Apple TVs in every classroom instead of smart devices for the most part.
I think that's a terrible idea.
Well, I'm partially with you, but this time decisions are being made from the top down versus getting teacher input.
Of course. Anyone who's ever AirPlayed to an Apple TV knows what I'm talking about.
Yep.
All right, so, okay, that's interesting. So you're talking about maybe like, I get what you're saying. The use case entirely. The idea of having a staff on a Keynote slide and drawing on it is pretty cool. I don't know if I would rather use that. Well, I guess it would just depend on how sensitive and accurate the pencil tool is once it's out of beta. I would typically go to something like GoodNotes for that, which has awesome presentation tools. But we'll see. That's really cool that you're thinking that way about that. All right, so this brings me to one of the other major announcements that happened, which was the rolling of iBooks author features into Pages for both the Mac and for iOS. It's unclear if iBooks author is totally dead yet. I know that for years it has not been receiving very major updates.
Correct.
You have created a lot of books, in some cases some fairly large books that have been on the iBook store. You've created using iBooks author for the Mac. So does the new Pages update contain all of the same features that iBooks author did?
Not yet. It's close. It's missing things like if you create an iBook with iBooks author, it includes a automatic title page, and it includes an automatic table of contents and automatic glossary. And those do not exist. You kind of get a large Pages document is kind of what you get, but it's going to export as an EPUB that can be uploaded to the iBook store, which I'm not sure I'm going to do this time around. I'm playing with Patreon a little bit, and I think what I might do is just make the iBook a reward for a sponsorship level of Patreon, something like $1 a month or something like that. That's the other catch, is even with the App Store, I don't understand how these companies are expected to keep surviving if you buy their app once and then that's all you ever have to buy. So, I'm not necessarily a fan of subscription models either necessarily, but I don't know. It's something I'm trying to figure out. But long story short is it's not quite as powerful, but a lot of the tools are there. So, I was playing with it. You can make bookmarks and you can hyperlink your own table of contents. You don't necessarily have to have Apple make it for you. So you still have that functionality. It's not quite all there yet, but you can see where it's going.
All right. What I imagine will happen is that they will kill iBooks Author for the Mac, and then in the same way that a couple years back, Apple rewrote iWork entirely and brought feature parity to both the Mac and iOS, but they took away some Mac features like Apple scripting, some of the power user stuff, in order to make all of the platforms uniform. But then eventually they did bring back some of those power features. I'm hoping that for people like you who are serious about iBooks Author, that will be the direction that this goes.
Yeah, and I think, my MacBook is really old now. It is a 2008, and it cannot run the last two versions of Mac OS. And so I can't get updates to Pages or anything else anymore. So these are the things that also push me towards having to buy a new MacBook. And as we've talked about it, I'm waiting to see if Apple comes out with a new MacBook with a yet improved keyboard from the one that you've got right now. And we've talked about that too, right?
What are you talking about? My third version of this keyboard is doing just great.
Oh, it's funny stuff, isn't it? Third version. Is it the same computer? They just put 3 different keyboards in, by the way?
Oh yeah, they have replaced the bottom plate of my MacBook 2 times since I bought it about a year ago.
Holy cow. And you've got the Touch Bar one too, right?
Yep.
Do you ever use it?
For another show.
Okay. No, I just curious.
Yes.
All right.
I do. I don't like it, but I do use it. Yes.
Okay. All right. Because that's one of the things that's intriguing me. But anyway, but on my 2008 MacBook, iBooks Author has never been speedy, even in the old days. It's been a very slow, clunky program where Pages has always run just fine. And on my iPad Pro, which incidentally is probably 4 times faster than my MacBook at least, right? From 2008. I'm running and working on combining these iBooks into a single book at this point, and the iPad Pro is just running like a champ. So I think they're losing some aspect of the clunkiness of iBooks Author that used to be there. So I think you're right. I think we're going to see iBooks Author go away, and that's probably not a bad thing.
So I have some concluding thoughts, but first, did I miss any major announcements that you thought were worth talking about?
That is a great question. I think you have the main points. Apple was really touting creativity, and it was a specific slam against the Google suite, I think. The idea,
I see what you mean.
You know what I mean? It was intentional. They also showed people using GarageBand, and GarageBand on the iPad is more functional than it used to be. It does some really cool things, but it's not GarageBand of Mac. I'd love to see that product brought up to parity, with each other. I would love to see that. But they're really trying to make a point, and I hope people are listening. Apple's original idea, even back to iTunes U, of providing content, that's still the part where I think they're still trying to help us out. They're trying to find a way, even with like iBooks suddenly being on the iPad and part of Pages, you don't have to go and learn a separate application anymore to make an iBook. So if you want to be the teacher, you want to be the expert in your field, you want to write the book, you now have that potential at your fingertips with your iPad or potentially with your MacBook, and you can just go do it. The idea of being creative, making movies, doing and that's the other kit, is they're going to be really focusing on augmented reality, and I still don't know where that totally goes. I think we were talking about in San Antonio the idea of having glasses that would be AR that would, like, for example, help you see where fingering should go, right? Didn't we talk about that?
Yeah, we did.
Maybe that's where they're going with this too, because they were also pushing AR kit on education, and that'd be interesting. I still haven't embraced all of that beyond putting Thomas virtually in my living room, for my son, or putting a Porsche for my son, my older son, in the middle of the living room for him to see. You know what I mean? With augmented reality. So that's the other thing, is they're really pushing that, and the Chromebook really isn't well suited for that. And that's okay. The Chromebook is okay. There's nothing wrong with Chromebook. There's nothing, if your school is going one-to-one Chromebook, that's not so bad. But I still look at you and say, well, then there's nothing stopping you as a teacher from having your own device that you would use. I cannot imagine teaching without my iPad Pro at this point, just in terms of the things that I do with it and the power that it gives me and the flexibility it gives me, and especially the ability to deal with sheet music. Again, I know that's a very basic way of integrating, is just substitution using your iPad for music. But boy, does it make my life better. I don't know about you, if you're still doing music off your iPad, aren't you?
Yeah, for the most part. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't imagine teaching without it. I really can't. But so I don't know. There's a lot here, and the idea that the pencil now works with a really cheap iPad, that'd be so much fun for so many kids. My son right now, who is 6, just turned 6, he is destroying our house through paper. Just sheet after sheet after sheet after sheet after sheet after sheet of paper, just drawing. And I just think, man, it sounds crazy, but if we got one of those new iPads for him at $309 and a pencil, how much how much can we save the environment right now from the reams of paper that we're going through in our house? I'm not even joking about that. Because he's just drawing and he's writing and he's making his own books. We have no idea what he's writing, but he's writing his own books. And just the creativity and potential here is huge. So, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see where we go. And the other catch is that there seems to be such an anti-Apple bias out there. And I know that sounds crazy. Maybe it's because I like Apple. But it sure seems like everybody's trying to just punch them for everything that they do. And nothing is ever good enough, or nothing's ever cheap enough, or nothing's ever enough. But yet we don't have those same expectations of Google. It's like, oh, you made this really inexpensive device that, really is well suited for typing. Awesome. Thank you for doing that for education. And just, it doesn't seem like Apple gets the credit that it deserves for its own work, even if the software isn't, the software and hardware has a divide, it's still pretty functional.
Well, brace yourself for my concluding thoughts then.
Okay, I'll brace it.
or provide a counterpoint.
A counterpoint. Okay.
My thoughts from this event were not entirely cynical. I thought everything that was announced was awesome. I think that Apple they made some very solid announcements. I think some of these announcements, especially the learning management software stuff, is a little bit too little too late. But that's okay. Apple is late in a lot of respects to the things that they develop. What I think is really important is that whether we see another Apple Education keynote between now and 6 years from now or not, I think that Apple is going to have to show a more continued effort in software development in the next 6 years than they appeared to be able to do lately. And I'm referring to some consumer software too. I mean, I think that Apple's software development team is best in class, but I think that they're very spread thin. And we're seeing things, we're seeing some really, really great stuff in some areas, but then we're seeing some other not so great things in other areas. And when I say not so great, I'm referring to, as a productivity guy, I really was drawn to the Mac because of all of the little nice details that exist on the Mac. And some of those details include how nice the mail, the calendar, and the reminders and notes apps were. Just those basic productivity apps are so nice. And in some respects, we haven't really seen any major updates to those apps. In some cases, like the calendar app hasn't received more than 1 or 2 major updates since I started using the Mac, which was I switched over in 2006. So, I think Apple is doing a lot of things right now. They're doing a lot of really good things, but if they're going to keep up an education, it can't be a once every 6 years thing. It's kind of like you mentioned the multitasking features. You're just starting to use iPad multitasking recently, but they announced that split view app feature in iOS 9, and it had a lot of issues, and they didn't really do anything about those issues until iOS 11. And that's a really long time to be someone who's trying to adopt and use those features to not really see any sort of vigor in software development. So I don't know. I feel like this is one of Apple's main areas, especially given how much locked into Apple devices I feel by the software. Like, their hardware is great. It's indisputably great. I love my iPhone 10. The new 10.5-inch iPad Pro is beyond amazing. I don't own one, but it looks really awesome. But it's really Apple's software that I feel like is what I don't want to give up about Apple products, and it seems to be an area they're really struggling to stay afloat now. So I don't know. I think it can't just be classroom for the Mac, and then education is ignored for 6 years, and then some other new stuff. Like, they've got to continuously, like, Google is not locked to a WWDC and an iOS update every year. Like, they're just constantly innovating. And I think that's where some of the Apple criticism might be coming from. So, at least mine. So, anyway, those are some of my thoughts. I think good steps forward, but they've got to keep them coming.
See, having taught in a one-to-one, I have been watching Apple's commitment to education for the last 5 years change from a free-for-all where basically if you went one-to-one iPad, basically students could do whatever they wanted at any time, and you basically had no control, to where we are today. So I see the classroom on the Mac, again, just being a response to teachers that didn't have an iPad wanting to be able to control and manage their classroom. So I have a little different perspective in that. I think overall you're right. Sometimes the software seems like it isn't updated fast enough or whatever, but at the same time, sometimes it's hard to improve upon what you've already got, and then when you do, you get lambasted for changing something too at the same time. I think still remember when we went from Scott Forstall and the skeuomorphism issue where everything at one point looked like real leather, real felt, whatever, and then we went to the other side of kind of the industrial look on, and people combination, didn't like the skeuomorphism, but then didn't like the industrial look, and it just, you can't make everybody happy all the time. I think you're right though, if we don't see continued improvements, but there has been. The previous 9.7-inch iPad wasn't for the standard consumer. It was basically for schools. That was a response to Chromebook. The current 9.7-inch iPad, it's for consumers, but mainly it's for education. So I think they've been working. I think they've been doing a decent job, but nothing is ever fast enough for us. Now the question is, with Google, expectations are so low that suddenly it doesn't take too much before we praise them. So literally you have a situation, I always joke about this, but Google suddenly adds the ability to add a footnote and people have a party. Like, oh, we can do a footnote, and it's like, what software package that's a word processor in the past 20 years hasn't had the ability to do a footnote from day one? It's kind of like, and I know you've had a very long discussion with them, but like Dorico, it's like, suddenly Dorico will do this, and people are like, hey, Dorico finally does this, and I understand what they're going through. I mean, they're really starting from scratch, as Google was too, but it's kind of like, I don't know if that should be celebrated or just, oh, okay, well, thank goodness it's finally here. We don't have that mentality, so I don't know, Robbie. It's such a. I still question Google's motive. I know what Apple's motive is. They want you to buy their hardware. End of story. They're going to protect your data. End of story. Somebody posted, did you see the post the other day about a guy that looked on Google and saw all the data that had been collected? Did you see that article?
No. Should I link it in the show notes?
If you can find it, if I can find it again. I read Apple News. That's where I get my curated source of news right now. And some guy in London had finally taken the plunge and looked deep into what Google had been collecting on him, and it was gigabytes of data. And I don't know how he found it. I don't know where it's posted, but that's scary stuff. And to think that we're freely putting our students in there, and Google can say that they're not selling it all they want, or that they're scrubbing the data and then selling it to people, but it's a little scary what we're willing to trade for free. That goes with Gmail users like you and I. That goes with YouTube users like you and I. We are willing to trade a lot of data for free, and I don't know at what point that comes back to haunt us, and I hope it doesn't.
That's a good question. Well, and I think that's right. That right there is what Google wants. And I think both Apple and Google's play in education is just simply to get kids accustomed to using their apps, hardware, and services in a way that when they grow up, they want to buy iPads or they want to keep using the Google suite. But yes, I agree with you. There's some serious dangers there. I also agree with you that, yes, everyone loves to hate on Apple in this regard. My cynicism with Apple is largely fueled by the fact that I really want them to be successful in education. I'm jealous that I can't use any of these new features. I would love to use all this stuff. I don't think my school is going to buy iPads, and even if we did fundraising, I don't think our IT department would allow us to give students Apple IDs because we use single sign-on.
Hey, by the way,
it's yeah.
That's the other piece we didn't talk about: the upping of storage from 5 gigabytes to 200 gigabytes.
Thank you for catching that.
Well, if you had not said that, I would not have thought of it. That's major in one regard, which is your 32 gigabyte iPad. That's your stock iPad that's used in multiple classrooms. You have a classroom set that instead of a student taking from room to room, the students all log in onto the iPad, and then their account comes in. That change from 5 gigabytes to 200 gigabytes makes that possible with a combination of iCloud. So that's a major shift. It's long overdue, but thankfully answered. So, and then the other thing that they didn't answer in this this keynote address was schools still can't buy in-app purchases with apps, which means that any app, for example, let's take Notion, for example. If you want to add sounds to Notion and buy the sounds, or if you want to add handwriting ability in Notion, there's no way for a school to do that right now. And they didn't answer that question about how schools could tap into in-app purchases. Forgot about that one.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Totally true. But no, I'm with you, though. I think that, I want Apple to be successful, and it's for that very reason that, I continue to try to keep a level head about these things and really expect the most of them. But yes, solid efforts, it seems. I mean, I think time will tell. I'm curious, maybe in a year or two's time, we can do this again, and I can, I'd imagine at a one-to-one school, you're going to probably be using this schoolwork app.
I don't know. I'm going to wait to see what it does. And one of the questions for us is going to be, because we are throwing all into Schoology, will Schoology somehow link up with the schoolwork app? That becomes the big question. Will the existing LMSs or CMSs, whichever one you call it, learning management or classroom management, will they work with Apple on this, or will they say, no, we're going to do our own thing? It'd be interesting if Google Classroom would work with schoolwork.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting.
It
Don't
sure
know.
would. Yep.
Don't know. But if I were Google, I'd be doing because Google wins, because again, they're all about data, right? Google wins if your school goes iPad. Google wins if your school goes Chromebook. They win either way, because your school district, there are very few school districts anymore that aren't using the Google suite, because it's basically unlimited storage, unlimited accounts, everything free. So I don't know many. Do you even know any schools anymore that aren't Google App schools?
I don't know. When I was at the district I was teaching in before the one I'm in now, which is right next door, they were not using the Google apps. I mean, some people are using Microsoft 365, but most schools I know are using both.
Yeah, yep.
Huh. All right. Well,
That's
I feel like that about
choice.
covers it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Well, thank you for talking about this. I wanted the perspective of someone who was in music education, and I thought, the iPad one-to-one thing was icing on top of the cake, if not essential, when talking this through. So thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me, too. It's always good to talk with you.
Since it's customary, where can people listening find out more about you or follow your work?
Couple things that I'm doing right now. Obviously, the website techinmusiced.com, although I haven't written anything for a little while. I think I wrote something about the Apple thing just the other day. And Paul Shimmons and I do a podcast. We haven't done one for a while, but now that both of our lives go back to a little bit normal, we were doing our middle school musical, and then he was doing his after that. The MET podcast, Music Education Technology Podcast. And then I've been doing a lot of stuff with ukulele lately, so you can find me at ukestuff.info, And then also at my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/ukulele-tenor. Because I'm a tenor that also plays ukulele. Not because I play tenor ukulele, but the other way around. So that's how you can find me if you ever want to see what I'm up to lately.
Awesome. All great places to follow you. I'm going to mention also on Twitter, you are at CJR
PhD. Yeah, awesome. I used to go with Choir Guy all the time, but I'm not just a Choir Guy anymore. So I felt like I have to start distancing myself from that label, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
I'll just add the blog and the podcast are awesome, and everyone should check them out.
Well, I'd say that about yours too, but they're already listening to your podcast.
Fair enough.
But they can check out your blog.
They sure can. It's a click away if you're listening to this in a web browser. All right, I'm going to say bye to you, but then I'm not actually going to hang up.
Okay, that's all right.
And I'm going to leave that statement in the show unedited, because I know that that's your favorite thing about my show is my haphazard and lazy editing.
It's not the I didn't say that at all. I said how I enjoyed the one bell that went off or whatever it was in the middle of one of your podcasts, and you're just like, nobody will probably catch it anyway.
All right. Well, Chris,
right.
It's been awesome talking to you, and I will catch you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.